That day I understood that love can die without making a sound. It was on my own birthday, in front of my entire family, when my husband Michael stood up with a glass of wine in his hand, smiled arrogantly and said, "Let's toast to Sarah, my wife, the strongest woman I know, because, truth be told, I only married her out of pity." The laughter that followed was a cruel roar that tore me apart inside. The laughter of his brothers, the uncomfortable glances from my children, the heavy silence at the table, it all mixed into a whirlwind that made me swallow tears I didn't dare let fall. No one defended me, not even my oldest son, who just lowered his head and pretended not to hear. But me? I just sat there, my smile frozen, my soul shattered. I only managed to raise my glass and say calmly, "Thank you, Michael, for reminding me that the most expensive gifts don't always come wrapped. Some come disguised as humiliation." The silence that followed was more hurtful than the laughter, and as everyone looked away, I knew deep down that this would be the last day I would ever cry in silence for him. But before we continue, I want to give you a very special invitation. Subscribe to Grandma's Diary and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment below which city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. That night, when everyone had left and the empty glasses sat on the table, I looked into his eyes and saw something that frightened and disgusted me at the same time. Pleasure. Yes, Michael enjoyed humiliating me. It was his way of reminding me that he controlled me, that I depended on him, that without him, I was nobody. But he was wrong. He had mistaken my silence for weakness and my patience for surrender. I gathered the plates, washed the remnants of his party, and went up to the bedroom. He was asleep, snoring with the peace of someone who doesn't fear tomorrow. I watched him for a few seconds, and for the first time in 35 years I didn't feel love, or anger, or pity. I felt nothing. And when a woman reaches the point of feeling nothing, it's because something very big is about to change. I sat in front of the mirror. The reflection looking back at me wasn't that of a victim. It was a tired woman, yes, but alive, lucid, with a spark starting to glow where before there was only shadow. I remembered my youth, when I was independent, cheerful, free. I remembered that before Michael I had dreams. And I understood that the lost spark hadn't been extinguished by time, but by him, with every mockery, every insult, every time he made me believe I was nobody without his last name. The next morning, as he read the newspaper as if nothing had happened, I served him breakfast in silence. He didn't even look at me. He just commented with that irony that always accompanied him. "Don't get sentimental, Sarah. Last night was a joke. You know how I am." I looked up and watched him. His cynical smile, his arrogant confidence, and something inside me just clicked. A cold calm took over me. I took a napkin, delicately wiped my hands, and said, "Yes, Michael, I know exactly who you are." He didn't understand the real meaning of those words, but I did. That afternoon, when he left for work, I sat down at the phone and wrote a message. It was for Daniel, his best friend. A man who had always been kind to me, who had once, silently, told me with his eyes that I deserved better. "Hi, Daniel, it's Sarah. I need to talk to you, but not about Michael. About me." I hit send without thinking twice, and when I did, something inside me broke. Or maybe it broke free. That night, I slept without crying for the first time in a long time. I dreamed of Michael's laughter, but it didn't hurt. I dreamed of Daniel's gaze, and I felt peace. I didn't know if my message was the beginning of revenge or the first step toward my salvation, but I knew one thing. I was no longer the same woman who had stayed silent in the face of laughter. Another woman had been born, and she had no intention of ever being silent again. Not even an hour passed after I sent that message when I saw the 2 blue check marks appear on the screen. My heart sped up. Daniel was online. I thought maybe he would ignore my message, or just reply out of obligation, as one does with someone trapped in a dead marriage for decades, but his response came almost immediately. "Sarah, you don't have to explain anything. If you need to talk, I'm listening. I always will." I stared at those words for a long minute. I always will. They were 4 simple words, but they held something my husband hadn't given me in 35 years. Willingness, presence, respect. The next morning I called him. His voice, deep and calm, made me feel a strange peace. We met at a coffee shop downtown, one Michael never visited because he said only classless people go there. When I arrived, Daniel was already waiting. Time had changed him, but his eyes were still the same, clear, honest, the kind that look at you without judgment. He stood up, hugged me carefully, as if afraid of breaking something. "You look tired, Sarah," he said, "but also different." "It's because I'm not afraid anymore," I replied. We sat down. I ordered a black coffee, he, a tea. We talked about simple things at first, the weather, his grandchildren, the years that had passed. But all it took was one silence, one of those dense silences that only exist between two people who understand each other without speaking, for the words to start pouring out of me like a dammed river. I told him about the dinner, the laughter, the humiliation. I told him I didn't cry, that something inside me had broken forever. And when I finished, Daniel didn't offer advice. He didn't tell me to forget it, or that men are like that. He just said, "You didn't deserve that. Ever." It was the first time in years someone had told me an unadorned truth, without pity, without disguise. Over the next few routines, our conversations became a secret routine. We sent short messages, sometimes trivial, sometimes deep. I told him how Michael came home smelling of someone else's perfume, how he boasted about business deals that didn't exist, how his laughter stuck in me like a thorn every night. And Daniel listened, always with patience, always with that respect that gave me back my breath. One day he wrote to me, "Sarah, you can't let him keep destroying you. You don't need revenge, you need to be yourself again." But I wasn't ready to hear that. At that moment, I didn't want to be me. I wanted Michael to pay, so I changed the subject and proposed something. "Remember Michael told you about that meeting he has on Friday?" I said over the phone. "Yes." "Why?" "Because he's not going. He's going to tell me he has to stay late at the office. And while he's gone, I want us to see him together." Daniel was silent. "Are you sure, Sarah? I need to see the truth with my own eyes." He agreed, though his tone held more concern than curiosity. On Friday, I picked him up on the corner of my street. I wore a simple dress and a scarf around my neck to hide the trembling in my hands. We parked across from the restaurant where Michael supposedly had a business dinner. It didn't take long to see him arrive, accompanied by a young woman in a red dress with a loud, obnoxious laugh. I saw him take her hand. I saw him kiss her before they went inside. Daniel said nothing. He just looked at me, waiting for my reaction. But I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. I felt liberation. It was as if seeing him with her confirmed what I had known for years, that this man no longer had any power over me. I took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for coming with me." "You didn't have to see it to know, Sarah," he replied. "I know, but seeing it, it hurts less than imagining it." We stayed there, in silence, me watching the restaurant door, him watching me, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. That night, Michael came home drunk, threw his keys on the table and yelled from the hallway, "Aren't you going to serve me dinner, or are you just going to keep playing the victim?" I stood up slowly and looked at him. "I'm not your victim anymore, Michael." "What did you say?" He laughed. "Nothing. Good night." I went up to the bedroom and locked the door. I lit a candle and opened my notebook. I started writing everything down, in detail, like a war journal. Every wound has a memory. Every silence has a limit. And as I wrote, I understood that what had started as an impulse for revenge was transforming into something bigger, into a recovery. Daniel was giving me back the reflection I thought I had lost. He made me feel visible, capable, human. And the most dangerous part, I was starting to care about him. A few days later, he called me. "Can I see you?" he asked. "What for?" I replied, trying to sound indifferent. "To remind you that you don't need to seek justice by destroying yourself in the process." That night, we met again at the same coffee shop. We spoke little, but when our eyes met, I knew something was changing. There was an invisible bridge between us, built of understanding and shared wounds. And I, who had sworn never to feel again, found myself wishing this conversation would never end. When I got home, I looked at Michael sleeping with his mouth open, oblivious to everything, and in that silence, with the dim light from the hallway entering the room, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer live waiting for his love. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide what to do with the rest of my story. That night, before sleeping, I wrote a single line in my notebook. I don't want him to suffer. I want him to understand what it means to lose me. And for the first time, I smiled without guilt. They say that when you look back, the past looks back at you. And in those days, every memory returned a gaze that hurt more than any insult. As I wrote in my notebook, the years of marriage appeared to me as frozen scenes, one after another, as if my mind wanted to explain at what point I stopped being me and became her, the silent wife of Michael Serrano. When I met him, I was 25. I was an art teacher at a small school. He was a manager at an import company. Elegant, confident, with that deep voice that enveloped you without you realizing it. He made me feel special. He said he admired my sensitivity, that he liked my paintings, that I had something different from the others, and I, coming from a humble family, fell into the trap of feeling chosen. The first few months were like a dream. Flowers, letters, dinners at expensive restaurants where he made me laugh and held my hand in front of everyone. "I want to take care of you," he told me once. I didn't understand then that wanting to take care can be the most elegant way of wanting to control. After we got married, he started to change. First, it was the small comments. "That dress doesn't look good on you. Don't paint so much, it doesn't make any money. Don't talk so loud when we're with my partners." And slowly, without realizing it, I stopped laughing the same way. I stopped painting. I stopped talking so much. When I told him I wanted children, he replied, "In due time." For now, I need a wife who accompanies me, not a mother who distracts me. Still, our son was born 2 years later, and I raised him almost alone, while Michael traveled and returned more distant each time. I clung to the memories of the good days, to those few times he truly hugged me or made me feel like my voice mattered. But soon, those moments became scraps. He gave affection when he needed control. If I complained, he made me feel guilty. If I stayed silent, he made me feel invisible. For years, I thought the problem was me. That if I were more patient, sweeter, more accommodating, things would get better. But the truth is, some loves aren't cured with tenderness, they rot with it. And it was in one of those silences that Daniel reappeared in my life. A friend from my youth, someone who was always near but never too close. I remember one day he came to the house, more than 20 years ago, and Michael introduced him with pride. "He's my best friend," he said, while I served coffee. And Daniel smiled at me with a gentleness that contrasted with my husband's cold stare. That afternoon when he left, Michael told me in a threatening tone, "Don't look at him so much. I don't want him to think you like him." And just like that, I understood that even looking wasn't free in my marriage. I returned to the present with a shiver. Time had passed, but the scars were still there, invisible and deep. I picked up an old photo, one of the few left from our wedding day. Me, in white, radiant, naive. He, in a dark suit, with that smile I mistook for love. Now I saw it for what it was, a mask. At that moment the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Are you okay?" he asked with a worried voice. "Yes," I lied, "just thinking about the past." "Don't think about it so much," he said. "The past can't hurt you if you stop revisiting it." I wish it were that easy. It's not. But it's necessary. His voice was like a balm. And though I was afraid to admit it, I liked hearing it. There was a tenderness in his words that reminded me of who I was before being erased. It wasn't love, yet. It was recognition. And that was already a danger, because Michael was starting to notice. That night, he came home early. Something unusual. He smelled like whiskey and jealousy. "Who were you talking to?" he asked without looking at me. "No one," I replied, knowing he wouldn't believe me. He approached, snatched the phone from my hands, and checked my messages. He found nothing, because I had learned to delete the conversations. But his gaze pierced me with rage. "Don't embarrass me, Sarah. You know you're nobody without me." I didn't answer. But in my head, a different, stronger voice told me, "Not anymore, Michael. Not anymore." When he went up to sleep, I stayed on the sofa, looking out the window. Outside, the city lights flickered, as if the world kept spinning without me. And I thought about something Daniel had said days before. Sometimes, revenge isn't about hurting the other person, It's about stopping living in their shadow. I fell asleep with that phrase in my mind. The next day, I received a letter in the mailbox. It was from Daniel. Inside, a handwritten page. I don't know if what you feel for me is gratitude or something more, but I want you to remember this. You deserve a life where you don't have to ask permission to breathe, I cried. I cried for the woman I had been, for the one I still was, and for the one who was beginning to be born. I didn't know where this path was taking me, but I felt there was no turning back. I closed my journal with a final sentence written in black ink. Sometimes, the love that hurts the most isn't the one you lack, but the one you have left over from the past. And that night, while Michael snored, I promised myself that the next memory I had of myself wouldn't be of a broken woman, but of a free one. I never thought silence could be so loud. My silence, the same one that for years was a symbol of submission, had become a threat. Michael noticed it, and when a man like him feels he's losing control, his fear disguises itself as fury. That morning I came downstairs with a calm step. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, and sunlight streamed through the curtains. It was a morning like any other, but something in the air was different. I was different. I sat across from him, with a serenity that baffled him. "Aren't you going to say anything?" he asked, without looking up from the newspaper. "About what?" I replied, stirring the sugar in my cup. "About last night. I spoke to you, and you didn't even look at me. Maybe because I have nothing left to say to you, Michael." His eyes shot up, searching for the usual submission, but he didn't find it. He only saw a calm that disarmed him. "What's wrong with you lately?" he said, trying to sound authoritative. "Nothing. I'm just tired of being your shadow." He fell silent, and for an instant, I saw something new in his face: insecurity. He didn't know how to react to a woman who didn't tremble, who didn't apologize, who didn't justify her existence. He tried to smile, but his laugh broke. "Wow, you're finally getting funny," he muttered with contempt. "No, Michael, I'm getting free." He dropped his cup with a sharp crack. The coffee spilled onto the table, staining the white tablecloth, and that small accident was like an omen. Something was about to break. Over the following days, the tension in the house grew. His comments became more biting, his gestures more controlling, but they didn't affect me anymore. There was something in me that scared him. My indifference. My peace infuriated him more than any shout. One afternoon he walked into my studio without knocking. I was painting after many years. The smell of oil paint filled the air, and on the canvas, strokes of light and shadow were beginning to be born, as if my soul were baring itself for the first time in decades. He stood in the doorway, watching. "Back to your nonsense?" he said. "Yes. My nonsense?" I replied without looking at him. "And what does that mean?" "It means I don't need your permission to exist anymore." That sentence threw him off. For a second, he seemed to want to yell at me, but he didn't. He just turned around and left, slamming the door so hard that the fresh paint trembled on the easel. I smiled, because his anger was confirmation of my silent victory. That night Daniel called. His voice was my refuge. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Better than ever. I think Michael is starting to fear me." "He doesn't fear you," he replied. "He respects you. And he doesn't know how to handle it." "Respect?" I laughed softly. "I don't know if that word exists in his world." "Then invent it yourself," he said. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah." His words caressed my soul, and for a moment, I thought about how unfair fate had been. Why did the right man arrive so late? But I quickly understood that it wasn't a matter of time but of transformation. Daniel hadn't arrived to replace Michael. He had arrived to remind me who I was before I was destroyed. That night, when I got into bed, Michael watched me from the other side. "Who do you talk to so much lately?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "Myself," I answered. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. I know when you're plotting something." "Then, for once in your life, trust your instinct," I said, turning my back to him. The silence that followed was thick, tense, unbearable, but behind it was something I recognized: fear. For the first time, Michael was afraid of losing control. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing him. The days turned into a game of glances, a battlefield disguised as routine. He tried to provoke me with cruel comments, waiting for my reaction, but I didn't give him one. and that indifference was his most painful punishment. One afternoon, as I was putting on makeup in front of the mirror, he asked me sarcastically, "And where are you going so dressed up?" "To live," I replied, and I left. That night, when I returned, I found him waiting on the sofa with a cigarette between his fingers and a half-finished glass of whiskey. "Where were you?" he asked. "Out for a walk." "Don't take me for a fool. Relax, Michael. I don't need to. You do it perfectly well on your own." His face changed. He stood up abruptly, glass still in hand. "Be careful, Sarah. You don't know who you're playing with." "Yes, I do," I said, looking him in the eyes, "with a man who doesn't scare anyone anymore." The glass fell to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The echo of the crystal was the exact sound of what was happening between us. The first crack. That night I slept with the door locked and a calm heart. I was no longer the obedient wife or the invisible woman. I was a woman who had learned that sometimes revenge isn't about attacking. It's about no longer being afraid. As I fell asleep, I wrote in my diary, "You don't hear the first crack, but when it appears, nothing is ever the same." And though I couldn't imagine it, that crack would soon become an earthquake. One that would not only demolish my marriage, but reveal secrets that had been buried for years. The air felt different that afternoon, a mix of calm and foreboding. A week had passed since the last argument with Michael, and although he continued to act with his usual arrogance, something in his gaze had changed. He didn't see me as before, and that, more than his fury, gave me satisfaction. I had promised myself not to allow him one more wound, and yet the heart is treacherous. Between so much silence and tension, the only thing that brought me relief was hearing Daniel's voice. He had become my refuge again, but this time, his voice wasn't just comfort. It was an open door to another life. We had arranged to meet at his house. It was the first time I had visited him since this all began. I remember when I arrived, the smell of old wood and fresh coffee wrapped around me like a caress. On a shelf there were photos of his late wife, his grandchildren, simple moments full of truth. It was a home with a soul, something I hadn't felt in a long time. "You look calmer," he said as he poured the coffee. "More determined," I replied. "And is that good or dangerous?" "Depends on who's asking." I smiled. We laughed. It was a light, mature laugh, like that of two people who understand each other without needing words. And in that pause his gaze turned more serious. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. But before we continue, I want to give you a very special invitation. Subscribe to Grandma's Diary and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment below which city you're watching from. Now, let's continue, because what comes next will give you chills." His tone was grave, almost confessional. "I've been reviewing some of Michael's papers," he said. "Papers? Why?" "Because a month ago, he asked me for a favor. He wanted help opening a new account, but something didn't add up." "A new account? What are you talking about?" Daniel looked at me intently. "Your husband has hidden money, Sarah. And not just that. There's an insurance policy in his name signed after you two got married. And," I said, my heart racing, "I'm not the beneficiary." "No. It's in the name of Chloe Salcido." The silence that followed was so thick the air seemed to stop. I felt a cold chill run from my chest down to my hands. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Completely. He signed it recently." "Chloe?" I repeated, confused. "His secretary?" "The very same." I brought a hand to my face, trying to process it. It was as if a hidden door had opened before me, revealing not just his betrayal but his plan. "So," I whispered, "if something happened to me, she would get everything?" "Exactly." My heart was pounding. All the pieces fit together. His absences, his irritability, his sudden interest in my schedule, his insistence that I not go out alone. Michael wasn't just cheating on me, he was preparing to erase me from the map. "Daniel," I said, trembling, "if that's true, I need proof." "I have it, but you have to promise me something. Don't do anything reckless." I already made promises that killed me slowly. "Not this time. Sarah, listen to me. You can't confront him alone. I'm not going to. I'm going to let him destroy himself." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in front of the mirror, looking at my hands, wondering at what point I went from being a wife to being a witness to my own ruin. But something inside me also ignited. It wasn't fear, it was determination. I checked my accounts, my papers, my personal items. I discovered that some documents had disappeared. Among them, the deed to the house. That's when I understood everything. Michael was moving every piece with precision. And in the meantime, I had to pretend I knew nothing. The next morning I came down with a rehearsed calm. I found him eating breakfast, impeccable as always, scanning the newspaper with that false elegance that repulsed me. "Sleep well?" he said without looking at me. "Like an angel," I replied. "Good. I have an important meeting today. I'll be back late." "Perfect. I'll take the opportunity to organize some papers." "Papers?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Nothing important," I said, smiling. His gaze scanned me from head to toe, searching for signs, suspicion, fear, but he found nothing, and that was my victory. When he left, I followed him silently. I saw him meet Chloe at a cafe downtown. She took his hand with a familiarity that turned my stomach, but I didn't cry, not anymore. I recorded everything from the car, their conversation, their gestures, even the moment he passed her an envelope. I knew this video, along with the proof Daniel had, would be my ultimate weapon. When I returned home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power, a quiet power. Cold, exact. The power of a woman who no longer waits for justice. She manufactures it. That night, when Michael returned, I received him with a smile. He looked at me strangely. "Why are you so quiet?" "Because words sometimes get in the way. And what does that mean?" "You'll find out, Michael, very soon." When he went to sleep, I took out my notebook and wrote, "I have discovered the truth, but I'm not going to shout it. The truth, when kept silent, can be more lethal than any revenge." I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The night was calm. The kind of calm that precedes the storm, and this time, the storm would bear my name. Once you know the truth, you can never sleep the same way again. Ever since Daniel showed me those documents, every night became a rehearsal for what was to come. While Michael slept beside me, I planned, I memorized, I acted, and every breath of his, every peaceful snore, reminded me how little he had left of that false security he loved so much. Sunday morning, I went down to the kitchen early. I made coffee, put flowers in the center of the table, and checked my phone. Everything was ready. I had sent the messages the night before, with a cordial, neutral tone. "Dears, I'm expecting you on Friday for a special dinner at home. I want to celebrate family, life, and new beginnings." I knew they would all come. My son, his wife, Michael's brothers, and of course him. No one would miss the show. I got dressed in a blue dress that had been stored away for years. It was the same one I wore on our 20th anniversary, before his cruelty made me forget I was beautiful. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in decades, I recognized myself. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by the house. He had a folder in his hand, and a serious expression. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. More than ever. This could ruin him. "No, Daniel, this is going to show who he always was." I sat across from him. Inside the folder were copies of the accounts, the audio recordings, the transfers, and the messages Daniel had recovered. Enough evidence to destroy Michael's reputation and prove he had tried to defraud me, even remove me from the insurance. "Just promise me one thing," I said. "Anything. If something happens to me, give all of this to the police." He nodded, in silence. And for a moment I thought about all that could have been if I had met him sooner. But life doesn't go backward. Sometimes, it just lets you choose how to close the circle. Friday arrived. The house was spotless, the table set, the wine ready. I lit candles, put on soft music, and waited. One by one the guests began to arrive, smiling, faking a harmony that never existed. Michael entered last. He carried an expensive bottle of wine and that fake smile of someone who believes they are in control. "Wow, looks like someone went all out," he said mockingly. "I just want a quiet night," I replied. During dinner everyone talked about trivial things. I pretended to laugh, served the dishes, observed every gesture. Chloe, the secretary, wasn't there, but her shadow was. Michael kept checking his phone, nervous, as if waiting for a message. And then, I did it. I waited for the exact moment, when everyone had a glass in hand and the conversations were mingling. I gently tapped my glass with a spoon. The crystal sound made silence fall over the table. Before dessert, I said in a calm voice, "I want to show you something." I turned on the television screen. The images appeared. Michael at the cafe with Chloe, holding her hand, handing her an envelope. The laughter died. The air became thick. Michael turned pale. "What is this?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Just a reminder," I replied, "of what happens when you forget who you're married to." My son stood up, confused. "Dad? What are you doing with that woman? It's not what it looks like," Michael shouted. "This is a trap." "Oh no," I interrupted. "Traps are made with lies. This is just the truth." I took the folder and placed it on the table. "Here are the documents for your secret account, Michael. And here, the insurance policy that excludes me. By the way, congratulations. You were very careful. But not careful enough." The silence was total. I could hear his breathing tremble. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him, and for the first time, I saw him as small. This man who for years believed he was a giant next to me, now shrank before his own shame. "So this is what you were?" I said with a cold calm. "A coward who needed to crush a woman to feel strong. A traitor who signed my death sentence while I served him dinner." Michael slammed the table. "Shut up! Enough! Does it bother you to hear what you did?" I retorted. "Well, get used to it. Because tonight, everyone is going to hear it." I took out my phone and played the audio of his conversation with Chloe. "I just have to make sure she signs the document. Once she dies, it will all be yours." The faces around the table contorted. My son took a step back, as if he didn't recognize the man in front of him. Michael, red with fury, tried to grab the phone from me. I pushed him away firmly. "Touch me, and it will be the last thing you do," I said. Chaos erupted. Shouts, reproaches, tears. The family was falling apart before my eyes, but I felt no guilt, only a strange peace, the peace of someone finally free from the weight of fear. Michael looked at me, defeated. "What did you gain from this, Sarah?" "Myself. And you think they'll believe you? They don't need to. I have proof. And you have hell waiting for you." I turned around and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. I only heard my son say between sobs, "Dad, how could you?" That night I slept alone. But it wasn't a sad loneliness. It was the loneliness of freedom, of someone who no longer needs anyone's approval to feel alive. Before turning off the light, I wrote in my notebook, "Masks always fall. You just have to have the courage to wait for the exact moment to rip them off." And with that, I closed my eyes, knowing that the next day, nothing would ever be the same. The silence of the next day was so profound, I could hear the ticking of the clock like someone else's heart. There were no shouts, no crying, no footsteps, just the echoes of everything that had exploded the night before. The house was calm, but it wasn't the calm of peace. It was the calm of the aftermath, that moment when the dust settles on the ruins. I walked barefoot through the living room, picking up the remains of the dinner. Overturned glasses, crumpled napkins, a tablecloth stained with wine and truth. Everything smelled like defeat, but not mine. I stopped in front of the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the same one who had endured humiliation for decades. Her eyes were serene, but firm. There was something almost dangerous in that calm. Something only women who have survived their own fear know. Mid-morning, the phone rang. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "What do you want, Michael?" I asked, devoid of emotion. "We need to talk. We have nothing to say. I'm outside." I stayed silent for a few seconds. I looked out the window, and there he was, standing, his face haggard, his shirt unironed, his eyes bloodshot. The great Michael Serrano, the man who always believed himself indestructible, now looked like a shadow. I opened the door. He entered without asking permission, as always. But this time, not because he had power, but because he didn't know how to act any other way. He stood there, looking around, with a mixture of rage and bewilderment. "You took down the photos," he said. "Yes." "You threw them away." "No. I burned them." His lips trembled. "What did you do, Sarah?" "What I should have done years ago. Cleaned the house." "Cleaned?" He laughed nervously. "You destroyed me." "No, Michael. I just took off your mask." He approached, shoulders tense, his breath smelling of alcohol and desperation. Was it necessary to do it in front of everyone? He said, his voice broken. Yes, because you humiliated me in front of everyone. That was a joke, damn it, he yelled, slamming the table. A joke? I repeated slowly, savoring each syllable. You laughed at me for 35 years, Michael. And when I couldn't take it anymore, when I decided to return the smile, you call it a joke. He fell silent. His gaze was that of a cornered man, unable to understand how power had slipped from his hands. What did you gain from this? He asked bitterly. Me? You? He laughed. You're alone, Sarah. What good does it do you? Everything. Solitude doesn't scare me. I already used up all my fear on you. He smoked nervously, pacing back and forth. You can't destroy me like this. You don't know who you're messing with. Of course I do. I have contacts. I have lawyers. I have people. You had, I interrupted. You have nothing left. I showed him the folder on the table. His hands trembled as he took it. Upon opening it, his expression changed from arrogance to terror. There were the copies of the transfers, the emails with Chloe, the bank records. Every lie, every trap, every signature. Where did you get this? He stammered. It doesn't matter. This isn't legally valid. You don't need it to be, because I already turned it in. The cigarette fell from his hands. What? The police report is filed? No. You couldn't have. I did it yesterday. And just in case, I also sent it to the press. His face turned to ash. He collapsed into the chair. Why are you doing this to me? He said in a thin voice. Don't be mistaken, Michael. This isn't revenge. It's justice. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and pleading. You can't ruin me. Not after everything I gave you. Gave me? I laughed in disbelief. What did you give me? Scars? Nights of fear? The years I wasted believing I was worth less than I was? You gave me ruins, and I built my freedom with them. He tried to stand, but his legs were shaking. He looked old. Not from age, but from the weight of emptiness. You weren't like this, he said through gritted teeth. No, you made me like this. You're worse than me. No. I just learned to speak your language. And use it against you. He approached slowly, his eyes glassy. For a moment, I thought he was going to hit me, but he didn't. He just looked at me, as if searching for something of the woman he once knew. Sarah, he whispered, don't hate me. I don't hate you. Then why? Because I needed to look you in the eyes, and have you know what it feels like to be small. The door burst open. It was my son. I didn't expect to see him, but Daniel must have told him what happened. His face was tense, confused. Dad, what did you do? He asked. Michael turned to him. Son, don't listen to your mother. She's... I saw the documents, my son interrupted. You don't know what you're doing. Yes, I do. You destroyed Mom. And now, you're destroying yourself. Michael was speechless. His eyes filled with tears, whether from shame or fear, I don't know. My son approached me and took my hand. Let's go, Mom. No. I want to hear him, I said. He shook his head. He has nothing left to say. Michael slumped in the chair, his head in his hands. Is this how it ends? He murmured. Yes, I replied. This is how it ends when a lie lasts too long. I approached slowly and left an envelope in front of him. What is this? He asked. The divorce papers. So soon? I had them ready for months. I was just waiting for the right time. He opened it. Inside, along with the signature, was a photo of us from our wedding day. On the back, I had written a single sentence. Thank you for teaching me who I never want to be again. He stood up, staggering, his face gray, suddenly aged. And what are you going to do now, Sarah? Live? Alone? Free? He stared at me for a long time, with that mix of resentment and melancholy that men have when they discover their power is gone. And then, before leaving, he asked in a hollow voice, And Daniel? Are you going to use him too? I don't need to use anyone, but if he joins me, it will be because he wants to. Not because he fears me. He turned his head to the side, his eyes glassy. You're cruel. No, Michael. I'm a consequence. He walked to the door. His hand trembled on the knob. For an instant, I thought he would say something else, some last phrase to try and regain control. But no. He just muttered. I never thought your silence could hurt more than your words." And he left. The house was silent again, a different silence. It was no longer the silence of submission, but of closure. I stood in the middle of the living room, breathing deeply. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't pray. I just felt a relief. Minutes later, the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "It's done. And how do you feel?" "Light. I told you," he whispered. "Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to hold its gaze." That night, I saw him again. We met at the cafe where it all began. Daniel waited for me with that calm smile that always reminded me what respect felt like. We ordered wine and spoke little. We didn't need to. Between us, words had stopped being necessary. I told him how the visit went. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at me with tenderness. "Did you realize something, Sarah?" he asked. "What? You defeated him without becoming him." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, a lump in my throat. Because he was right. I didn't destroy him with hatred. I destroyed him with truth, and that was the greatest victory of all. Back home, I lit a candle. The flame flickered for a moment before stabilizing. I watched it for a long time. It was small, but steady. Like me. I took my notebook and wrote, "The final blow isn't when the other person falls. It's when you realize you no longer need to see them fall to feel free." I closed the diary. I looked around. The house was at peace, and for the first time in 35 years, so was I. 6 months have passed since that night when everything fell apart. 6 months since Michael walked out that door for the last time with the face of a man who didn't understand how he'd lost everything he thought was guaranteed. Sometimes I think about him. Not with hatred or nostalgia, just with that distance one reserves for memories that ache, but no longer wound. It's strange how the silence that used to suffocate me now feels like a refuge. I live alone in the same house where the shadow of my fear used to live, but it's not the same. I changed the curtains. I painted the walls. I donated the furniture he chose. Every corner now bears my mark, a silent declaration of independence. In the kitchen hangs a painting I finished recently. A woman, her back to the viewer, looking at the sea. Some say she looks sad, but she's not. That woman is at peace, because she understood that looking at the horizon isn't always about waiting. Sometimes, it's about being grateful. During the first few days after he left, there was a strange, almost physical emptiness. Not the emptiness of missing someone, but of getting used to the absence of the habit. After 35 years of living with a constant presence, even silence has weight. I would wake up out of inertia at 6 in the morning. I'd make 2 cups of coffee, and then remember there was no one left to serve. The first sip tasted like freedom, but also loneliness. I learned that freedom doesn't always arrive dressed in joy. Sometimes it arrives like a wounded animal, trembling, untrusting, but alive. And you have to learn to feed it, to care for it, until it stops being afraid to stay. The first few months were an exercise in rebuilding. My body, my mind, my name. For years I got used to hearing my name only in his voice, pronounced with contempt or indifference. Now I say it myself, slowly, in front of the mirror, like a prayer. Sarah. How ironic, right? To carry that name and have lived defeated for so long. I started painting again. The smell of oil paint saved me more than once. My hands, stained with color, reminded me that I could still create beauty, even after living in hell. Sometimes I would stop in front of the canvas, take a deep breath, and tell myself, this is also revenge, Sarah. Not destroying, but building again. Michael didn't go to prison. The evidence Daniel and I presented was enough to get him fired, to make him lose his reputation and his money, but not enough to lock him up. I didn't care. The real sentence was watching him lose what he loved most. His son's respect, the power over me, the image of himself. His punishment was living, knowing that nobody believed him anymore. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he lives in a small rented apartment, far from the city. They say he aged overnight, that he barely goes out, that he drinks more than he eats. Sometimes, when I think about that, I feel a pang of compassion. And then I remember he never had compassion for me. and then I let the feeling dissolve like a leaf carried away by the river. Daniel, however, remained my lighthouse. Not my savior, not my partner, not my excuse. Just a companion in this rebuilding process. We see each other often. We have coffee, walk in the park, talk about art, about life, about how time changes us without asking permission. He never pressures me. He demands nothing of me. And that, after so many years of oppression, feels like the greatest act of love. One afternoon, as we were walking, he told me something I still hold in my heart. Sometimes we confuse love with the habit of suffering, and when we stop suffering, we think we've stopped loving. But real love doesn't hurt, Sarah. It heals. I didn't answer. I just smiled, because I understood that for the first time, someone saw me without trying to define me. And that simple gaze was enough to remind me that love doesn't have to be a battlefield. It can be a place to rest. The divorce trial was quick. Michael didn't show up. My lawyer told me he signed the papers without reading them, with a note in the margin, "I don't want to see her again." And just like that, I never saw him again. Not even when his mother died, or when they sold his parents' old house. Nothing. It was as if we had been ghosts to each other. But the funny thing is, it didn't hurt. Because deep down I had already said goodbye to him long before. I had buried him in silence the day he humiliated me in front of everyone. What died at that dinner wasn't our marriage, it was my fear. Sometimes, at night, I go out to the garden with a glass of wine and look at the stars. I think about all the versions of myself I had to let die to get here. The obedient wife, the invisible woman, the one who stayed quiet to avoid a fight, the one who convinced herself it was her fault. I bury them one by one, tenderly, because all of them brought me to this woman I am now. And then, in a low voice, I tell them, "Thank you for surviving when I didn't know how." Not everything is perfect, of course. There are days when the past returns with its bitter echo. There are mornings when I still wake up startled, expecting to hear his voice yelling from the hallway. But I don't tremble anymore. I just smile and tell myself, "It's okay, Sarah. He's not here. He can't touch you anymore." I've learned that healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without bleeding. It's looking at the scar and saying, yes, it hurt. But it doesn't hurt me anymore. Recently, my son came to visit me. I hadn't seen him in months. He arrived with a bouquet of flowers and eyes full of guilt. "Mom," he said, "I never knew everything you were going through. I thought you were exaggerating." "Don't blame yourself, son," I replied. "There are things a mother can't explain without breaking." "Did you forgive him?" he asked. I thought for a few seconds before answering. Yes, but not for him. For me. Because forgiveness isn't about absolving the other person, it's about stop carrying their shadow. My son cried. I did too. And that hug felt like coming home after a long winter. One night, I dreamed of Michael. He was sitting across from me at the dining table, his gaze tired. He didn't speak. He just watched me. And for the first time, there was no hatred in his face, only resignation. I woke up without fear and understood that the cycle had finally closed. Today I am 61 years old, and I feel more alive than ever. I don't need a partner to feel complete, or a full house to feel accompanied. I have my paintings, my plants, my books, my silences, and my name. That is enough. Freedom isn't measured by how many doors you can open, but by how many you decide never to walk through again. Sometimes, when I walk through the city, people greet me with curiosity, as if trying to guess my story. And I smile, because they don't know that beneath this serene woman is a hurricane that survived itself. They don't know that every step I take was earned with tears, with courage, and with the certainty that life was worth living even if it hurt. A few days ago, Daniel gave me a new notebook. So you can keep writing, he said. And what should I write now? I asked. Your new story. What if I have nothing left to tell? Then write about what it feels like to no longer have to explain yourself, and that's what I do. Every morning I write something small, a reflection, a thought, a sentence, not to publish it, but to remind myself that I am still alive, and that this life, mine and mine alone, is worth more than any ring or last name. Tonight I decided to talk to you, who are listening to me, who reached the end of my story. Maybe you too have had to fake smiles in front of those who hurt you. Maybe you got used to a love that hurt more than it healed. Let me tell you something. From woman to woman, or soul to soul, don't wait for someone else to save you. Sometimes, salvation arrives the day you look in the mirror and decide not to cry anymore for someone who doesn't deserve it. Don't be afraid of being alone. Loneliness, when chosen, becomes a home. And freedom, even if it costs you, is worth every wound left on the path. If someone had told me a year ago that I would smile for real again, I wouldn't have believed them. But here I am, alive, with wrinkles, yes, with scars too, but with a dignity that no one can ever take from me. Because after everything, the victory wasn't destroying him, it was rebuilding me. I say goodbye with these words, looking at the camera, with a calm voice and a quiet heart. If anyone ever made you feel small, remember this. It wasn't that you were worthless. It was that the other person didn't know how to see greatness. Subscribe, leave a like if this story touched your heart, and tell me down below what city you're listening from. Because every story you share reminds me that we are not alone, that life always gives second chances, and that the most powerful love that exists is the one we learn to give ourselves. And so ends my story. My name is Sarah Serrano, and this was my freedom.